Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Forest Carbon University, presented by the Forest Landowners Foundation. We're just going to give everybody a few minutes here to get in from the waiting room into the webinar. But in the meantime, if you'd like to say hello in the chat box and tell us where you're from, that would be great. Good morning, everyone. You are in the Forest Carbon University, presented by the Forest Landowners Foundation. Just give about maybe 30 more seconds here as we have a couple more folks getting into the webinar, and then we will be on our way. Okay, well, we're going to get started because we have a jam-packed presentation for you. I'm Melinda Gable with the Forest Landowners Foundation, and we're so glad you could join us for this second webinar in our 5-part series. The Forest Landowner Foundation, we work directly with the Forest Landowner Association, representing private working forests, private forest landowners across the country. And part of what we do is work to make sure that you have the resources and the knowledge as it concerns the management of your forest and markets. And we all know an emerging market and a big hot topic right now are voluntary carbon markets. And it's a very evolving, fast-paced, shifting landscape, if you will. So we developed this Forest Carbon University program to really find out where are the gaps. You know, we did a survey of our landowners across the country, and about 50% of the respondents of 340 said that they had attended a webinar on carbon markets, or they attended a meeting and they felt more knowledgeable, but they still didn't have the confidence to really go further than that. And so what we wanted to find out and develop is, what is it that landowners needed to feel more confident, or at least have a better understanding to decide if entering a carbon market fit within your management plan, you know, the legality of it, your harvest use and those things. So that is what we are working on through this webinar series. And we've worked with our presenters, Tommy Elder being the presenter today for Anew carbon markets, to really get at the transactional aspects of quantifying the carbon credits, selling the carbon credits into the marketplace. How does the revenue get back to the landowner? What's the process from beginning to end? And then, what are the considerations and the consequences regarding that? And so Tommy's going to address all of that. We have an hour scheduled, but we are committed to staying here for the duration until all the questions are answered. So this is your time to have one-on-one with Tommy and with Anew. And so with that, Tommy, I'll turn it over for you, and we look forward to hearing more about your program.
Thank you so much for that great introduction, Melinda. I couldn't have said it all better myself. And thank you so much to the Forest Landowners Foundation for inviting me to join you in this webinar series. It's very appropriately named Forest Carbon University because I live in a college town and all the students are back on campus now, so the timing's perfect. And I also, Melinda already mentioned the survey, but I really want to thank all of the landowners that took some time to fill that out, because it really helped me to go through those results and understand exactly what you're interested in learning, so I could tailor my presentation to meet those goals. And as Melinda mentioned, my understanding is that you've heard the old forest carbon song and dance and introduction material. And so we want to get into brass tacks in detail. And my goal today is to, in hopefully around 30 minutes, to leave great time for questions, give you as much detail as possible so you can have a better understanding of when and how you would think about engaging in forest carbon project development partnerships, ideally with Anew. And before I introduce the company, I'll spend some time just introducing myself, and then we'll get into the content of the presentation, where I'll go through really what are the key steps to forest carbon project development, some things that landowners could keep in mind about forest carbon project development, in particular, some misconceptions that I hope to clear up, and just what a typical transaction looks like. So my name is Tommy Elder, and I lead forest carbon project origination for Anew Climate. And before that, I did investor relations for the Forest Land Group, and I also spent some time in public-private partnerships for the Forest Service. And I got my master's in forest finance at Yale, and have really always been interested in how to bring incentives to landowners for, good land stewardship. And that's why I'm really excited to work for Anew, because this company specializes in bringing revenue to landowners that are managing their forests sustainably. We've been in operation for over 20 years, and we've received multiple accolades and been voted Environmental Finance's Best Project Developer for over 7 years running. And we have a dedicated forestry team that really differentiates our company from others. And we have 26 professional accredited foresters in-house. And another thing that's a differentiator from other developers that Anew brings to the table is our ownership. So we are owned and managed by TPG Rise, and that is the largest private equity fund in the world focused on climate change mitigation. And what that means for our landowner partners is simply that our ownership, our company, your interests, and the public's interests are totally aligned in terms of working together on measurable, high integrity, additional, and durable climate change mitigation. And we've been doing that across over 4 million acres in over 90 projects. And so we've got a really strong kind of foothold and lots of experience in the Northeast, the Great Lakes, and Appalachia. And we're really working to expand our partnerships in the West and in the Southeast and in Alaska. And we've got some existing experience here, and our pipeline of relationships is growing, and we're looking to push that further. We've been lucky to partner with a wide variety of landowners, and that includes state and public forest landowners. It includes private industrial landowners and TIMOs, and it includes families, and also conservation and nonprofit landowners. And we learn something new from every partnership and bring that lessons learned into our subsequent contracts. And so we're looking forward to connecting with all of you and continuing that track record. Another key differentiator that I want to share about Anew is our commercial team. So Anew is a turnkey forest carbon project developer, which means that from the moment the landowner has a question, hey, is there forest carbon on my landscape, to you have revenue in hand from the sale of forest carbon credits, we run that process soup to nuts and make it simple for you. And that last step where you have the revenue from the sale of carbon credits, we're really good at that part. And that's what this slide is really illustrating. And part of that is because Anew not only develops forest carbon projects, but we develop projects in a variety of carbon project types like regenerative agriculture and renewable energy and transportation. And what that means is that we bring to our landowners a breadth and depth of relationships with carbon buyers that is unparalleled, and that translates directly into premiums for our partners. And in order to deliver credits that earn those premiums, what we're looking for is really great projects. And for us, that means a large forest ownership that is under natural forest management and a long-term management cycle, and that has significant co-benefits. And those significant co-benefits are important because watershed health management tactics, habitat stewardship management tactics are the very same ones that happen to drive carbon storage and carbon sequestration outcomes. And in addition to that, the reasons why many of these buyers come to the table to natural climate solutions or nature-based solutions, carbon offsets, is because of the story behind it. They're buying carbon, but they're also buying all those other things that are why we all love the forests so much. And in terms of the large aspect of what we're looking for, our average project size is 20,000 acres. And in order for it really to be a fit for our skills and expertise, we're looking for a minimum of 3,000 to 4,000 acres. And I also want to let you all know that while that is a high minimum, that we have previously looked at projects and are working on ways that we can collaborate with multiple landowners at a time. So I did want to highlight that. And we have worked with both the compliance and the voluntary market, and we've worked across multiple registries, but there's 3 that we've used most frequently. What all these registries have in common, and what's really important to Anew and we're developing a forest carbon project, is that the registry that we use is science-based, that it involves regular public comment periods, and that it requires project-level third-party non-biased auditing through verification. So we work with established protocols that are as rigorous as possible. And the one that we are really focused on right now, the majority of our projects are developed under the American Carbon Registry's Improved Forest Management Protocol. The new version is at 2.0. And before I talk through our services, I'll just say that acreage isn't the driver of what makes a project work. What really makes a project work is your current stocking level, your growth rate, and how much you plan to harvest in terms of growth. So I've seen 3,000 acre projects work, and I've also seen 18,000 acre projects not work. What's important is to analyze the feasibility, and so that's a part of how we help, and that's what we'll talk about now. So there are 3 key steps to forest carbon project development with Anew, and the first is to do that feasibility study. And that's where we understand, both from a carbon crediting perspective and from a from a revenue perspective, what the project will look like. And if it does look like a mutually interesting opportunity, then the next step is for us to work together and for Anew to lead on developing the credits. This is the step number 2 that takes the longest and it's most expensive, and it's where we make things as simple as possible on your behalf. We execute and finance all the activities. And then the last step is marketing and sale of those credits that we've generated. And in reality, we start marketing and sale the minute we start marketing and selling credits the minute that we list them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that timing later. This is really where we shine, and we try to get the revenue to you as fast as possible by, in many instances, identifying a buyer before those credits are even issued. But before we're selling credits, we have to make sure that there are some. And so the first thing to do there is to simply give me a call, and we'll have a conversation together. And pretty quickly, I'll be able to understand, after hearing from you, some details about your ownership, your acreage, your forest cover type, how much you're harvesting, what you think of the growth rate is like, whether or not you're currently certified. I'll be able to get a feel for if it's worth it for us to take next steps together. And ideally it is, and I'll follow up in an email with a mutual confidentiality agreement and a data request. The most important part of that data request, and the things we need the most in order to conduct an effective and accurate feasibility analysis, is we need to know where your property is, either through GIS or through aerial photographs with the boundaries drawn. But we just need to know where the property is and what legal harvesting restrictions are. The rest of the information just allows us to be even more accurate, but I also want to mention that Anew really specializes in combining measurements that we take on the ground with information and data that we receive from our landowners, publicly available data through FIA, and remote sensing and LiDAR and other best available technology to conduct feasibility analysis that are really on point. And so after we receive that data, we'll take 4 to 6 weeks to complete the analysis. And the result of the feasibility analysis stage is an estimate of total carbon credit generation and landowner revenue based on our understanding of market dynamics and our projections of pricing. So we'll then get back on the phone together. We'll have been talking throughout this whole process, but we'll have a discussion about the results of that analysis and the assumptions that Anew used to generate that analysis. We'll get feedback from you, and in that conversation, we'll also discuss a proposed partnership structure. And if all of that makes sense to both parties, then we move to credit development. And this is a significantly longer process. So 4 to 6 weeks for feasibility, 18 to 24 months total between contracting with Anew and receiving your first paycheck from the sale of carbon credits. And that depends on a variety of factors. We try to keep it as close to 18 months as possible, but there's a lot of variables, including seasonality. So the first step here is to contract with us, and that says a month here, but it really just depends on how quickly we're communicating. And I'll just mention that Anew, over our 90+ projects, we've been working really hard to incorporate and massage our template contracts with terms that are simple, that meet everybody's needs, and that try to make that step as smooth as possible. So I can say that we have something that really works. And from there, it only takes a couple of weeks for us to list the project with the registry and let them know that, hey, this is coming and here are the general specs that we expect. And then we enter the 3 most important steps in credit development: the forest carbon inventory. And that's where we've been on the property with a consulting crew to assess all the biomass on your ownership and the carbon it contains. And from there, we go to modeling and documentation. And that's where we project the future carbon sequestration and the baseline scenario that'll define how much credit you get from the current carbon stocking that we measured in this step here, the forest carbon inventory. So after we complete all the modeling and documentation, it gets sent to a verifier. And the verifier is that third-party non-biased auditor who comes onto your property, and we're back on site again. We're on site for the inventory and we're on site for the verification too. And they look at a subset of the plots that we've measured, and they're really, taking a look at all the documentation as well and making sure that the carbon that we say is there and going to be there is accurate. And that leads us into this technical review where we're responding to questions, making adjustments. And once the verifier approves what we've done, it gets sent to the registry, and the registry approves the project. And very quickly after that, you get a credit issuance. And I'll talk through the timing of credit sales and some of the dynamics that go into that later. And then monitoring and management is ongoing over the 40-year term of the project. And that's another thing we'll dive into detail on later too. So I want to really take a moment and focus on these 3 key steps, because these are the steps that are most expensive, that are most time consuming, and where our services are most helpful as a turnkey forest carbon project developer. As I mentioned, we fund all the upfront costs for project development and we manage all the steps. So this is all covered, but I do want to make sure that you understand it, even if you're not responsible for executing in the way that Anew does on your behalf. So the inventory is that first step. And what Anew will do is we will design a CFI style grid specific to your property. And then we will put out an RFP for crews to help us with that inventory and implementing it. And on those permanent plots, we are taking so many more measurements than are typical in a merchantable timber inventory. So that would include everything from diameter at base height to diameter at root collar, the size of the crown. We're measuring merchantable and non-merchantable stems. We're measuring everything above an inch. We're measuring natural regeneration in the understory, and anything that holds carbon, we're gonna count it. And so we need to be on site when that's happening to ensure the quality of that work. And so you'll see us there. And we repeat that inventory process every 10 years. And with the RFP, we'll happily work with you if you have staff that you want to execute, but the inventory. But we put out the RFP to about, we have 25 or so different crews that we work with, and we generally put it out to 3 to 4 per region, so that we get competitive pricing and keep those costs down on behalf of our partners. So the result of the inventory is an accurate assessment of current carbon stocking. And then the next step is to go into modeling. And here in modeling, the result that we're looking for is a really accurate projection of credits and total credit generation over the course of the project. And the first step to that is we calculate how much carbon you're removing from the atmosphere. And that's how we project the removal credits. And I'll just pause here and mention that there's 2 ways you earn credits for a forest carbon project. The first is by protecting existing carbon stocks, and that's a conservation credit because you're conserving what's there. And the second is by cutting less than growth and increasing carbon sequestration and therefore removing it from the atmosphere, which is a removal credit. Both of those are calculated in this modeling step. So we project removal credits by projecting your forest's growth rate, and then also incorporating and subtracting out the percentage of that growth that you plan to harvest on an annual basis. So that's a highlight of a misconception. You can harvest while we do a forest carbon project, absolutely, and I'll talk more about that later. And then we calculate the conservation credits, and then we take the inventory data from the stocking that we got in that step, and then we model out a baseline, which is a hypothetical alternate scenario in which another landowner owns the property and they harvest it to its legal, financial, and operational limit. We project out that merchantable timber stocking rate that they're going to be reducing over time and translate it into carbon. And then we compare it to what you're committing to do, which is protect the current carbon stocking, and the delta is your conservation credit. So crediting is the result of step 2. And that's a long process. Modeling is really complicated and we're really good at it. Then we go to verification, and they come on site, they review a subset of our plots, and they make sure our inventory collection was accurate. And they look at all of our documentation. And this is what's such an important step to us, because having that kind of transparency and that kind of oversight is important to us to generate these high integrity credits. And here's a visualization of what I was describing earlier about the 2 ways you can earn carbon credits. And so right here, this is really what represents the forest carbon inventory, and the result of that is the estimate of carbon stocking currently. And then to get your conservation credits, this line here represents the hypothetical alternate scenario and what that other landowner would would do in terms of harvesting on an annual basis. And then these blue triangles here at the bottom, this is representing the carbon credits that you have protected that might have otherwise been subtracted from the landscape. And those are your conservation credits. And then up here, the forest is growing, and we're taking out any percentage of that growth that is being allocated for harvesting. And then what remains represents carbon removed from the atmosphere, and therefore a removal credit in these kind of black triangles here. And so you earn conservation and removal credits simultaneously, and you're rewarded for protecting carbon stocks and sequestering carbon. And another part of carbon credit calculation is the buffer contribution. Every year that you're issued credits, a certain amount of those credits have to be automatically deducted and allocated toward a buffer pool. And that's a collective buffer pool that's meant to cover unintentional reversals on your project and any other project that's registered with ACR due to things like a natural disaster or timber theft, anything that's not a proactive management decision, but that's a result of kind of an unforeseen circumstance. And according to the American Carbon Registry, you can allocate any approved credit from the last 5 years of any project type to the buffer pool. And because Anew is such a sophisticated, kind of broker of credits in multiple different project types, we can very often identify lower cost credits to allocate to your buffer. And then that simply adds value to our partners' bottom line, which is very much a priority of ours. And so after all that credit generation, it's time to market and sell these credits. And the timeline for marketing really begins the minute we list the project. We start trying to find like a good fit for a buyer. And we do that very well, and very often sell credits through unit contingent credit agreements, which means that they're sold at issuance. And part of the reason why we're successful in doing that is we develop great content in partnership with our landowners. We'll come onto your property, we'll take drone footage, we'll take photos, we'll interview you and your stakeholders to really understand what's special about this project, this property, and what makes these carbon benefits additional and important. And then that'll end up being content for brochures. It'll end up being content for webinars, for newsletters, for our blog series, for placed articles. We have a full team dedicated to this, and we will strategize about whether or not your credits should be marketed in a portfolio of credits from other projects with complementary characteristics, or as a single offtake to potentially a buyer that's located in your geography and that really wants to connect with a story. And the story here is what's important, and that really gets back to those co-benefits. So however we can get you premium pricing is how we approach that marketing. And then here's the trajectory of a credit. And this is not too complicated, but I do think it's and so the first thing is that Anew will create a registry account, and that's right after we list the project. And then 18 to 24 months after we list the project, we've developed the credits and we get our first issuance. And then if the credits have been sold already in a unit contingent credit agreement prior to issuance, I'm gonna turn my phone off here. Had it on to track my time. But, so if those credits were sold in a pre-issuance before issuance, then they'll be transferred to the buyer from the registry account 30 days after they're issued. And if they were sold to a buyer after they've been issued, then they'll stay in that registry account and they won't be transferred to the buyer until the buyer has signed a purchase contract. And after that, Anew will be paid by the buyer within 30 days of sale, and then we'll transfer revenue to Anew, to the landowner from Anew 30 days from our receipt. And in reality, it's a matter of weeks. We're much faster than that. And we like to be conservative though. So we wanted to kind of under promise and over deliver here, which is something that landowners should really consider when you're deciding whether to work with a project developer. And a couple of things that are really important for landowners to understand in my perspective are that you're making two commitments when you make a commitment to develop a forest carbon project. The first commitment is to the registry, and the second commitment is to your project developer, in this case, Anew. But we'll talk through your commitment to their registry first. So you're telling the American Carbon Registry in this instance that you're going to maintain the current level of carbon stocking on your property at the time at which you enroll for the duration of the project, which is 40 years. You're also telling the registry that anytime you're issued credits for sequestering additional carbon, that will become your new commitment, that you will maintain that level of carbon stocking for the duration of the monitoring period, which is 40 years. And so that means that you're committing to cut no more than growth. If you do want to harvest and it is commercial, you have to commit to the registry that property will be certified, either FSC, SFI, or the American Tree Forum. And the monitoring obligations that you're committing to are that 5-year verification on site that I mentioned, the full forest carbon inventory that I mentioned, which is every 10 years, annual reporting in which you are tracking carbon stock additions and impacts, like keeping all your mill receipts and then sharing them with the registry. And again, these are all things that Anew 100% handles for you if you work with us. But if you don't, then these are things that you have to follow through on. So if you do decide to work with Anew, then your commitment to us is to engage with us as your project developer. And we ask our landowners to harvest less than growth. So even though you don't have to commit to harvesting less than growth, for us, harvesting 100% of growth is just a little too close for comfort. And so we like to leave some room for error and unintentional kind of outcomes. And we ask all of our landowners to really agree to at least a 90% of growth harvest. And some of our landowners are right at 90%, some are at 20%. It just, again, depends on your stocking and your growth rate in your region. We need access to the property to handle the inventory and verification and all the marketing. And you're also committing to convey to Anew the credits generated from the project. And that conveyance can happen in 2 different places. It can happen at the time of issuance, which many of our landowners appreciate, because that way they don't have to ever record the asset of the credit on their books until they receive cash. Or we can have the landowner be the owner of the credit, and then we get transferred the credit ownership simultaneous with credit sale. And if it's important to landowner to kind of own the credits, then that's something we can do. But the former approach makes things a great deal simpler. And I wanted to just let folks know that harvesting less than growth here, in the survey that you filled out of the landowners that completed the survey that had done a forest carbon project, only 12% wanted additional harvesting flexibility. And so I think that there's a lot of talk and a lot of noise all the time about, oh, I I need to be able to manage in a forest carbon project, and you can. And in reality, the landowners that do forest carbon projects don't feel as hamstrung as I think the perception is. So I did want to highlight that survey result was very helpful. So here I want to go through and answer some common questions that we get from landowners directly. And the first is, can I sell a property once it's enrolled? And the answer is yes, and absolutely. And there's 3 different ways that you can do that. And the first is you can debit credits associated with that acreage out of the next issuance. The second is the purchaser of that part of the parcel can simply continue with the project. And the third is that you can purchase replacement credits. And Anew is perfectly capable of helping you with all 3 of these. And so part of why there's this flexibility that many landowners don't expect is because the registries, the protocols, and Anew's contract terms are all kind of designed to incentivize a large scale project. And I'll talk through that later. But can I develop a property once it's enrolled? Guess what? The answer is yes. And you can absolutely develop a property once it's enrolled, and it just depends on how much. And again, it depends on your stocking and your growth rate and your harvesting levels. But what you're agreeing to when you agree with Anew to that harvesting rate in terms of a percentage of growth, it's property wide. And so we're monitoring your property wide carbon stock changes. And so, site level flexibility exists to add a hunting lodge, to add roads, to add watershed infrastructure. And as long as you're tracking and reporting those changes, there's no approval required. Okay, can I continue to harvest? And we all know that the answer to this is yes. Sustainable forest management is absolutely aligned with forest carbon. And any property that has been managed, is being managed, and will be managed could potentially still be a fit. And it's just dependent on all those things I mentioned previously. And just a reminder that that certification is required for commercial harvesting. Okay, can I enroll a portion of my property? Yes, you can. However, oftentimes that will increase the buffer allocation from the average of 18% to something higher. And the reason because of leakage, the registry doesn't want to see an increase in harvesting on another ownership when just a parcel is being allocated to the forest carbon project. And so I do want to mention here that a larger project means you get more site level flexibility. So if you have, let's say 100,000 acres and you want to actively manage 5,000 acres, you can at the site level because the growth on the rest of the property will sort of carry the day. And so there's also cost efficiency in that those key steps that I mentioned of the inventory, the verification and all the modeling, the costs with those don't really decrease or increase proportionally with the size of the project. And so there's efficiency with scale. And the same thing with our contract terms. And then we already talked through whether or not you can decide whether to own the credits at any juncture. So the only requirement here is that we have to own the credits at the time we sell them to a buyer, just legally. And most of the time it's a benefit to the landowner for us to kind of play that role. So here's what a contract looks like, and I'll be quick here. Anew is a turnkey forest carbon project developer. We pay for all the upfront costs of project development, and then when credits are issued and sold, those costs get reimbursed at cost, no staff time included. It's a line item kind of reimbursement, and we send you a full report. And then after cost reimbursement, and then we make money in the same way. Anew gets a percentage of the remaining revenue, and the landowner gets a percentage of the remaining revenue. It's just that the landowner gets a lot more than double. It's so much. It's great, and it's as it should be. And so just want to be transparent about that. The percentage that Anew will get will be dependent on the size and complexity of the project. But what's always consistent is that the bulk, the vast majority, is going to our landowner partners. And what's driving some of this really exciting growth that we have in the voluntary market right now, I want to start by just highlighting and level setting with you on pricing. We're seeing a blended price at about $18 between a combination of those conservation and removal credits. We project growth at 5% annually. That's very, very conservative in light of the market drivers we see right now, which are increasing corporations, financial institutions making net zero commitments, and not necessarily making any operational changes. And so they really need offsets, and they really want offsets that are natural climate solutions because they're more efficient in terms of dollar invested in carbon outcome, and there's more co-benefits. You're buying carbon, you're buying local employment, water, habitat, and so these get premiums for these prices. And our outlook is that demand from these net zero commitments is going to outstrip supply for natural climate solutions through 2035 at least. And that means that it's a great time to enter into a forest carbon project. And another thing that I wanted to highlight is that, in the past couple of quarters, we've had some macro level market uncertainty, and even underneath that that scenario where many other investment types responded quite negatively and quickly to that uncertainty, that carbon prices really held, and transactions might have slowed, but that demand stayed steady and is picking right back up here in Q3. So I did want to just highlight that. And another thing I want to highlight is a review of very conservative estimates for landowner revenue. And this is an example of us getting way more into brass tacks and details than we typically do. But what you're seeing on this slide is a 10-year average of landowner revenue, net project costs, and net Anew profit sharing per acre per year with a flat $18 price. So we didn't incorporate any price growth into this. So these numbers, again, are, conservative. And so as you can see, there's a huge range. And, we are really working we didn't have enough data to share with you numbers that we felt confident in for the Southeast, and we're working to change that. So hopefully some of you located in the Southeast are now interested and understand how a forest carbon project might serve you. And we've had some landowners in Louisiana that we're working to help in various stages of project development, some that we haven't been able to. And that wasn't a revenue per acre issue. It was really a project size issue. And so we're going to be continuing to explore opportunities for aggregation for that to help make us get to yes, which is always what we want to do. And we did a recent analysis on a project in Virginia, for instance, and that was getting about $70 per acre per year. And so, yeah, just wanted to kind of let you all know what we're seeing right now and what to expect. And I think in many instances, these numbers are competitive with timber markets, if not beating them. So, but you'll have to confirm that with me. So with that, I'll stop and see if we have any questions. In the interest of time, I'm not going to share any case studies, but I am going to follow up and give you some examples of how Anew has worked with landowners and in particular private family and industrial landowners. And so you'll have that material, and if you would like additional detail, I can share it with you, but I wanted to prioritize a conversation together first. So thank you very much, Susie and Melinda.
That is great. Thank you so much, Tommy. And that is a great presentation, provided a lot of great information. I encourage everyone to put questions into the chat or into the Q&A, but I'll start off with a couple. I know that for now you're focusing, at least from your presentation, look kind of like your focus in the forest landowner arena is kind of 2,000, 3,000 acres and up. Do you expect it'll stay there, or will that change over time? And how did you get there?
Yeah, great question, Susie. And it's already changed over time. So our minimum when I was hired, which was just in February, was 5,000 acres. And myself and a couple of the other new origination leads were really seeing lots of interest and lots of opportunity with smaller land holdings. And in reality, that 5,000 acre minimum was reflective of market conditions that were no longer at play. And then in the past 2 years, prices have really doubled and then some. And so what that means is that properties that were a no or a maybe before are now like a yeah, I think so. And so that's exciting. And I've been able in my short time with Anew to even call a couple of landowners that we had said, sorry, it's not a great fit to, and say, hey, I think we could help you. And so that it looks like I'll have a contract like that closed this week, which is exciting.
That is great. That is great. I know that certification came up in your presentation. I was hoping maybe you could talk about it a little more, both in terms of how does certification play into certification of the land? So certification of the forest land itself, but also is there a certification in terms of, you mentioned the harvesting as well. So if you could just explain and talk that through a little bit more.
Yeah, so the property would need to be certified itself, not the harvest specifically.
Okay.
And you can work with the American Tree Farm, the Forest Stewardship Council, or the Sustainable Forestry Initiative.
Okay, and so is that for your program, does all land need to be certified?
No, only land in which there will be active commercial harvesting.
Okay, great, yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just seeing if there are any more questions that popped up. So I know you didn't have any, all right, here, actually one popped up there. Okay, here's one question. Given the 40-year contract, do you anticipate or hope to add any other ecosystem service payments to existing contracts as those markets develop?
Absolutely, and I think that Anew is looking at that now. We're paying a lot of attention and doing a lot of analysis right now on the opportunity to layer compensatory mitigation in forest carbon. And we're also looking at other types of carbon projects like reforestation or avoided wildfire emissions, blue carbon. And that's an opportunity that we're absolutely interested in, but we would have the same kind of qualifications for developing and selling those credits as we have for carbon, in that we would only want to work with protocols that are science-based, have regular public review, and require third-party non-biased auditing and verification. And right now, compensatory mitigation kind of fits that bill. There's not established frameworks that exist yet for like water and biodiversity in a comparable way. And we're absolutely interested in supporting that moving forward.
That's great. Thank you. Let me see. Okay, another one popped up in here. Okay, great. What happens when a contracted forest is at maximum sustainable timber volume? How would the landowner get credit for additional carbon sequestration?
Can you repeat that question?
So the way it's phrased is, so if a forest is at maximum sustainable timber volume, so at maximum density, how would that landowner get credit for additional carbon sequestration?
So the same way that we would calculate credits for the same way we would calculate credits for other projects. It just might mean that the bulk of the crediting on that particular project would come from carbon stocking, and therefore conservation credits over growth. And depending on your harvesting levels, there could be opportunities for removal credits as well. But yeah, if it's a forest that's incredibly highly stocked, then the conservation crediting is going to be really strong.
Okay.
Yeah.
And here's a question that builds a little bit on what we were talking about earlier in terms of maturing of the industry and the ability to accommodate a wider diversity of landowners. What sort of barriers to entry for smaller landowners for this particular type of carbon project do you see changing in the future as there's advances in technology or maturing of the carbon credit sale industry, something particularly like measurement technology or other changes? What do you see on that front?
I absolutely see the market opening up to a wider array of forest landowners. And right now, a new specialty is in, the kind of project sizes that I mentioned when it comes to improved forest management. But for avoided wildfire emissions and reforestation, those project sizes look different. And I'll say that in improved forest management, we are looking actively at opportunities to serve smaller landowners. And part of that could be through aggregation, and another strategy for that could be through simply leveraging technology and making the measurement, the expensive steps of inventory modeling and verification simpler and streamlined, and contracting, making that streamlined. And so I think that there's only going to be more opportunities in the future, and there are some protocols right now that are specific, that I think you're going to have folks share about, that are specific to landowners that have less than 3,000 acres. And we're kind of focused on how to bring smaller landowners into this particular protocol, where we really see a lot of we really have a lot of faith in the framework. So it's something we're working on.
That's great. And for this one, you may want to bring your slides up again. This one is specific to your slide on profit sharing, and a question to make sure that folks understood that slide. If you might be able to explain the range of payments landowners receive in those three regions. So you could just explain it, or you might want to pop that slide back up again.
Yeah, so what that was, and let me get this slide back. And so, can you see that now?
Yeah, we're seeing actually your presenter mode there.
Okay. Well, I can really just share that that in those ranges that it was an estimate of thinking about the project in terms of current pricing at $18 and keeping that flat through a 10-year project, and then taking out project costs, and then also taking out Anew's profit sharing proposed and accepted contract terms associated with each project. So we put in a couple of small, medium, and large projects into that analysis. And then that was the range of landowner payments on average per acre per year over the 10-year period. And so for, let me just.
So those
Okay.
numbers all represented what the landowner would receive.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And I'm not quite sure how to swap the, yeah, that's exactly right. Is this would just be revenue to the landowner. Yeah. And
Okay.
it's different in every region, and it's different based on your stocking, your property size, your growth rates, your harvesting levels. And there are different reasons why, you know, you would be on the high or low end. And that's why we do a feasibility analysis.
Great, great. Another question, is there a way to track Anew's carbon credits that are sold after sale to tell how many are retired versus held versus resold? So is there anywhere you post your credits?
Yes, all the credits that are sold are publicly available, and they are registered and listed, not just, you know, they're listed at who we sold them to and everything on the registry. So I can send a link to that in a follow-up email.
Okay, great. Thank you. Let me see. I don't see. So please feel free to continue to put up questions as they come in. I had one follow-up question on those promotional efforts, and I think those are so helpful. They explain some of it. I assume that there isn't a requirement on landowners to be part of those promotional efforts, or is that something that you expect of the landowners that participate in your program?
That's part of our services. And so we lead on marketing and sales 100%. In fact, it's important just for reducing the potential for confusion. It's important that Anew be the leader for all the marketing and sale of credits, unless there's some sort of agreement that the landowner is going to market a certain percentage of them or something. But to the extent that the landowner is interested in helping or providing quotes or joining webinars, they're welcome to. There's no expectation.
Okay, great. Thank you. Could you help explain how the landowner receives credit for conservation credits again? So this is the conservation credits versus removal credits. Can you explain that difference again and how the landowner receives credits in this case specifically for conservation credits?
Yes, we do a forest carbon inventory that estimates current carbon stocking. We build a hypothetical alternate scenario in which we estimate the legal, financial, and operational maximum of standing merchantable timber that could be harvested on the property over the term of our contract. And we compare that current carbon stocking to that, you know, maximum sort of harvesting level, and, you know, the delta essentially between maintaining that current carbon stock and what the other hypothetical alternate scenario could be is where landowners get credit for conservation.
And the difference between that and the removals?
Removals is not about protecting what's there. It's about sequestering additional carbon and removing it from the atmosphere. And so removals are entirely based on the fact that you're committing to harvest less than growth. So for every year that you're growing the forest and increasing biomass on site, you're increasing carbon and removing it from the atmosphere and storing it in trees. And that's where you get a removal credit.
Okay. Do activities like harvesting pine straw have an impact on your calculation of carbon, or is this seen as a neutral activity?
It is typically a neutral activity, and we still have to track and report it.
Okay. Any other questions? Or Melinda, do you have any questions?
No, Tommy, I think you really appreciate the detail you went to. And I think, you got to a lot of the discussion and questions that people have been having. So really appreciate it. As always, we will make these webinars available online, as well as the contacts of the people who Tommy and others as we continue. So thank you, everybody, for attending today. We had great attendance, and I think you got a lot out of it. And we look forward to having you as we have the other webinars coming up. So appreciate it, Tommy, very much. Really appreciate the detail and the thoroughness that you presented to us today. And thank you, Susie. You did a great job with the moderation.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
All righty.
everybody. Bye.